Lascan Corla, I feel very privileged to bring forward this piece of legislation, a very important piece of legislation tonight, which seeks to deliver much needed support for victims and survivors of domestic abuse, a statutory entitlement to domestic violence paid leave. Today, let's not forget, is the final day of the 16 Days of Activism campaign. Quite simply, the bill seeks to provide for a period of paid leave for people who are the victims of domestic abuse. I welcome that the Government are not opposing this legislation. I look forward to working with the Government to bring this legislation through all stages. I want to record my thanks to the staff in the OPLA and to my colleague Sinead Ní for their work to date on this. And I want to advise the Government that this legislation will not require much by way of amendment. It is ready to go. We have already consulted widely with the sector. They've had a huge input into this. We're all agreed that this is very necessary. We all want to do the right thing. So let us do this and let there be no delay. The provision of a statutory entitlement to paid leave is an acknowledgement by legislators of the challenges that workers face when trying to escape an abusive relationship. If we are to end the epidemic of domestic abuse in this state, we need a whole of society response that both supports and protects victims. Sinn Féin's legislation provides for up to 10 days paid domestic leave for people who are the victims of domestic violence, whatever their gender. Importantly, workers do not have to provide proof of their abuse or documentary evidence for the leave needed, as to do so would potentially act as a barrier to victims seeking the support that they need. Last count, Corla, the clock is not on. Sorry. Thank you. Legislation has a role legislation has a role to offer protections in the workplace to ensure that victims' rights and entitlements as employees are both enhanced and protected. The provisions in this bill will enable victims to take the necessary time off work they need, to seek support, to find accommodation, to attend court in a structured and in a supportive environment. I want to read to you the words of a survivor of domestic abuse about the difference this bill would have made and how important it is that we get this through all stages as quickly as possible. As a domestic violence survivor and someone who has gone through the court process, I can honestly say that 10 days paid leave is going to help so many women. It will take away a fear from potentially losing their job to go to court with their perpetrator. This will empower women and, I hope, encourage employers to support their staff in their court process, as it is an extremely difficult process to go through. Having 10 days will help women so much and will relieve stress for some of the women. This is a huge step forward into making the woman's journey somewhat smoother and less traumatic. New Zealand, Australia and provinces in Canada have already introduced forms of paid leave, and indeed the ICTU have recently called on the Government to ratify the ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. Article 18 of the accompanying recommendation identifies the provision of paid leave for domestic violence, flexible work arrangements and awareness raising about the effects of domestic violence as appropriate measures to mitigate the impact of this in the workplace. This legislation is an important addition to existing workplace rights. It is a workers' rights issue. It is an issue that affects women at work. It is one that I have seen myself in the course of my work as a trade union organiser. It is almost impossible to deal with it without this legislation, and I absolutely welcome the fact that the Government are not opposing it. But what I would say to you here this evening is we have legislation, we have consulted on it. I want to work with you to get this legislation through the Dáil and through the Seanad as quickly as possible to make it a reality for the men and women who really need it. This is an important piece of workers' rights legislation. We don't want to see it deflected or kicked down the road. A lot of work has been done on this. We need to pick up from where we are now and move forward together. Gormaigad.